Hey riders, Eric Lang with Ride Adventures here, and with me today is Andrew Murray, one of our lead instructors, brand ambassador. Andrew, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, today we're going to talk about common mistakes that people make that get them into trouble when they're going through sand. We're here today with one of our brand new rental bikes, a Yamaha T7, and we're in our roughly 300-foot long sand pit here at our range in Bend, Oregon.
We wrote down a list of things that we've seen kind of over and over, people making mistakes on, and one of them is looking down instead of up, or not looking where they're going.
Yeah, for sure. I think the key word there is not looking where you want yourself and the bike to go. When we train in this sand pit, a lot of times we'll put someone all the way at the end of the thing, at the end of the pit with a flag. That's your aiming point. So we try to train riders to look where they want themselves and the bike to go. The mistakes that happen, sometimes they look down at the irregularities in the sand that really don't matter that much what's right in front of you. Or as the bike starts to wobble a little bit, which it will do in sand, as the front wheel starts to turn, they start looking in the direction of the wheel rather than the direction that they want to go.
It's like, don't forget your intent. Don't forget where you're trying to go. Don't look where you don't want to go. Look where you want to go, right?
A great term that our instructor down in Pahrump uses is target acquisition versus target fixation.
Ah, good one.
So target fixation might be you see some chunky stuff in the sand and you fixate on it and look down, that causes trouble. Target acquisition is looking at your target, looking where you want to be, where you want yourself and the bike to go. Focusing on that point, that'll get you through the sand.
You look down, you go down.
Look to the side and take a ride.
Yeah, there you go. Another point that we see people making mistakes on is not getting into a proper standing position early enough or waiting too long.
So this is key. If you want to successfully ride through sand, you really need to be on the pegs, standing up, and standing in the proper body position. In our training, we spend a lot of time correcting and coaching people on a proper body position. We even have one specific drill that we do that focuses just on getting the students from a stopped bike up into a standing position immediately as the bike takes off. And you do want to be up on the pegs and steering the bike properly with your feet in the sand.
Kind of like saying there's nothing that says you have to stop at the seat. You can go from standing to standing on the bike.
Right, you can go straight from a stopped bike with your foot down straight up onto the pegs. So an example of what I'm talking about is to take off on the bike is rather than slowly take off and kick along with your feet and then try and find the pegs and then stand up, to just go immediately from taking off to straight up to the pegs.
And while we say that, another point, a mistake people are making is ignoring the opportunity to just sit and get through the sand as slowly and carefully as you need to. Perhaps while, yeah, the standing position is preferred, more athletic, you're gonna get through the sand in a riding fashion that way. Sometimes if you're all alone, you got a heavy bike all packed down, it's late in the day or whatever, maybe it makes sense to just put it down in first gear and sort of tap your feet along the way and get through safely.
Sometimes discretion's the better part of valor.
Sometimes the slow turtle wins the race because the slow turtle doesn't crash, right?
So the one thing about that, if you are going to resort to kicking the bike along, or what we call waddling or duck walking, as you put your feet down, you really want to put them forward, and as they get to about this point, picking them up. What you don't want to do as you're walking the bike is put your foot straight down and have it come back here. If you're hauling luggage along, then that can cause trouble.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, every once in a while, maybe you're by yourself, maybe it's just been a long day, you're tired, and like I said, discretion can be the better part of valor.
Okay, next mistake we said was too much tension and freezing up.
Yeah.
See this a lot, and you can see people go down when it happens.
There's a couple things going on. It's important to understand why a loose grip is important when you're in sand. This bike, and just about all of these adventure bikes, and dirt bikes for that matter too, they want to straighten themselves out. When the wheel gets cocked a little bit, like it does in sand, the rake in the trail and the geometry of this bike naturally makes the bike want to correct itself. If you've got a tight grip on the bars and the wheel is deflected and the bars are now like this, if you've got a tight death grip, you're now fighting the bike's desire to straighten itself out. I'm holding onto the bike so tightly now that when the wheel turns, instead of it naturally correcting itself, Now I'm holding in that position and I'm going to start going off to the side.
Not fighting a bike that weighs over 400 pounds and is going to move on its own anyway. You want to flow with it instead of fighting it with that. And along those lines, we said not to micromanage the bike.
Yeah, I like to use it. I mean, this term kind of comes from my human resources career, you know, prior to motorcycle instruction, but I like to use a term called micromanaging. You don't want to micromanage the bike when you're in sand. The bike is gonna find its way through the sand if you let it. You give it a little bit of throttle when it gets a little wobbly, it'll generally straighten itself out. If you try to correct for every little irregularity that you see in the sand or in the terrain, number one, you're gonna wear yourself out.
Yeah.
And number two, you're gonna be concentrating on what's up close instead of the target that you want to get to.
Keep the big picture in mind. Be ready for constant dynamic movement.
Yep.
And flow with it. We also said we've seen some mistakes in bike setup with people. It's something you can't really detect until they arrive and you can help them in person.
I don't like to look for excuses in the bike or in the tires for why you might be struggling in the sand. But the reality is that if your bike can be set up so wrong that it really makes it harder for you to be successful in the sand or in off-road terrain. As an example, and this is common with GS riders, you commonly see guys my size, I'm just under 6'1". You commonly see guys with GSs and other bikes with risers on their bars, so that instead of a nice athletic position, they've now moved the bars up and back. So now they're standing very straight up and down. The bars are now closer to their hips, and this is inherently a less stable position. Tipping the levers down slightly, having the handlebars properly aligned with the forks, not too high, not too far rotated, too far back. All of those things can help. If you're a really tall rider, I really encourage people to consider lowered pegs. Besides being easier on your knee joints when you're sitting, it just gives you a better standing position on the bike.
Okay, good one there.
What else, Eric?
We said that people are sometimes using either brake in the sand, and it's not that either brake can't be used, but really how often do you need to use a brake in the sand? You already have a lot of rolling resistance. So I think people sometimes are panicking a little bit, they get a little head shake or whatever, and maybe a brake gets involved, and that's...
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, we teach to always be covering the brake when you're off-road. And it is a normal habit or pattern for people when things get a little out of sorts to start grabbing the front brake. And you just really need to just remind yourself there's really almost no good that's going to come from using the front brake when you're in sand. I know there are riders, I know there are instructors and coaches that talk about dragging the rear brake somewhat or trail braking through sand. Can add some stability. I don't typically do it. Some people do and they have success with it, but that's the rear brake. I just don't see any reason to use front brake in the sand.
Sort of along those lines, we also said, why not just use the clutch instead of the brakes? If you want to spill off some power, slip in that clutch.
If things are just going south on you and the bike is really getting out of sorts, then yeah, buffering the power with clutch or even just pulling the clutch into sort of, to stop the party, so to speak. But yeah, a steady throttle and then buffering the clutch when you need to bleed off some speed is a very smooth way to not upset the balance of the bike.
Help make sure you keep those RPMs up so you're not going to accidentally kill it in the sand, which is another challenge. But yeah, slip in that clutch, very useful tool.
Yeah, and of course in sand you have to be careful. If you're applying a lot of power, you don't want to be slipping the clutch through the whole way because that could be hard on your clutch.
Yeah, burn a clutch pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, what's another mistake you've seen?
Yeah, so everyone has probably heard when you're in sand, you need to get your weight back. And it is true, we want to bias some of our weight more towards the rear than the front so that the front end is lighter. But being too far back can be to detriment. So if I'm on the bike like this, I'm all the way back, my arms are straight out. I have no more reach left in my arms. So if the front wheel is deflected, the first thing that's probably gonna happen is it's gonna pull me off center of the bike. Now I'm out of balance, now I've got a problem. Because when I got my elbows up and my arms have got some bend in them, the front end can wobble around and it doesn't throw my body off. When I'm back like this is gonna be a problem.
You're at the limits of your reach in both arms and you're sort of out of options.
Yeah, and this doesn't look too much different than what you see Dakar racers positioned like, but they're doing 80 miles an hour on highly specialized bikes and it's just a different kind of riding.
And often knowing that they're on the dead flats of a salt flat or something like that, and there's probably little chance that they're gonna have head shaker or anything like
Yeah.
that. Maybe it makes sense in some situations, but not running out of real estate with your hands is a
We're not
pretty-
trying to do 80 miles an hour.
Yeah, exactly. Just trying to get through the sand. Another mistake we said was relying too much on accelerating your speed instead of just keeping your momentum. What do we mean by that?
Yeah, so this is kind of like, you know, I talked just a minute ago about how people say, well, you have to put your weight back, and sometimes that ends up, someone's just too far back. Another common piece of advice that people get about sand is, when in doubt, throttle out, WFO, just open it up, go fast. The problem with that is, on a long stretch of sand, if all you're doing is adding speed in order to increase your stability, eventually you're going to be going probably faster than you would like to be going.
Yep.
And taking that speed off is difficult. This is a 300-foot long piece of sand here, so if all I do is just keep adding speed, I could be going 40 miles an hour at the end of it, and I don't want to go that fast. Yeah. It's important to keep your momentum going, keep the bike moving forward with steady throttle, and if you get a little bit out of whack, out of balance, a little bit of throttle can correct that. But if all you do is just keep adding throttle and continuing to accelerate, you better either hope it's a short stretch of sand that you're going to be out of pretty quick, or you better be prepared for some dire consequences.
Yeah, you want momentary bursts of acceleration to, you know, get the front end light if you want to over a certain spot, but you can't keep accelerating forever.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And those bursts of acceleration, I mean, I'm not even sure I'd call it a burst. It's a very subtle, can be a very subtle increase of just a little bit more throttle, or if you're buffering the clutch, just letting a little bit of clutch out.
So in that instance, we said if people are going too fast, they start to panic or something, a mistake we've seen is chopping the throttle off too quickly.
A lot of times in our classes, we do quite a bit of coaching on the proper techniques to go through sand. And then when students get started in it, usually, they get about halfway through the sand and sometimes things start to go a little awry. They start out with great technique, doing all the right things, and when things go a little awry, that's when the bad things start to happen. And one of those things, so we've talked about that sometimes they grab too much brake, or they grab brake, or their line of sight goes haywire. Another thing that happens is they chop the throttle, right? So they've got a nice bit of momentum, the bike gets a little sideways, and the first thing they do is let go of the throttle. The problem with that is, as soon as you do that, it's like putting on the brakes.
Yeah.
And so you
Weight
put on
goes
the brakes,
forward.
the weight goes
Yeah.
forward, the front end digs in, and then usually it tucks.
And in addition, you've lost engine RPMs that you might need in a moment to throttle back up and get through what you're in.
If you listen to someone going through sand that's successful at it, generally they have a very even, steady RPM sound to the engine. One mistake that people sometimes do is they sort of shut the whole bike down. They take off the throttle, pull in the clutch, and they go down to this sitting position, and now they're basically stopped and stuck in the sand. An alternative is what we call a dab. So a dab is when your body position gets out of shape, or the bike is getting a little wobbly or starts to tip one way. So a quick down to the ground and back up to the pegs. So this a lot of times can save you from either going down or losing all of your momentum and having to start over in deep sand, which is not always easy.
Yeah.
So a dab is going to be just a quick down to get your body position back. And really what you're more trying to save your body position than you are trying to save the bike.
And you're keeping the potential of your momentum never stopping. If you can do a quick dab and keep your speed going, it might keep you from getting stuck in the sand.
If this bike is falling all the way over, there's not a lot I can do to save it, right? But if my body is starting to get out of position, I can correct that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So.
We also said that sometimes riders are blaming the tire that they're on or the bike that they're on or something like that. And maybe it's true, but I've seen a lot of tires make it through a lot of different terrains. So.
You know, we've seen hundreds of students come through this sand pit, sometimes dozens of times. And I will say, I think we've seen, from the category of adventure bike, we've seen just about every kind of bike with every kind of tire come through this sand successfully. And we've seen just about every kind come through unsuccessfully. If your experience in sand so far is when you went in and you fell, chances are it wasn't the tires that threw you on the ground, and it wasn't the bike that threw you on the ground. It was something about what you were doing. The thing to think about is when the bike falls over in sand, pick it back up, shake yourself off, look at the tracks that you left, and start really analyzing what happened there, right? It's not always easy to do, but if the first thing you think of is, damn, these tires don't have enough grip, you won't ever be able to buy enough tire to correct for not using the proper skills or not learning from your mistakes.
Especially in the dual sport or adventure riding, off pavement world, there's no perfect tire for every single situation. You pretty much have to learn to deal with what you got. And yeah, there are some tires that are better in sand than others.
Yeah.
But right, it's not,
So
you
blaming
can go
the-
through this on a street tire for the most part.
Blaming the bike, blaming the tires, blaming the tire pressure.
Yeah.
These big 500-pound bikes, some people talk about lowering the tire pressure. And on a 500-pound bike with heavy, these heavy sidewall tires, you got to let so much air out before you ever start to feel any difference that now you're in danger of causing damage to your rims. So there might be some times if you really get stuck, really big bike like a GS or something like that, and you are just stuck in deep, deep sand and can't get out, can't get your momentum going, that might be a time to look at really lowering down air pressure a lot to get yourself unstuck. Just make sure you put it back up, because GS is 550. If you're carrying luggage, it might be 600 pounds. And if you're riding around on 15 or 20 or 25 PSI in your tires, chances
just
are
one
you're
rock
either,
down in there. Or
yeah,
something.
you're either going to bend a rim on a rock, or you're going to have the equivalent of a pinch flat if they're tubeless, right, where you pop the bead off.
Yep. Last point we said was to not actually practice until you enjoy it. The mistake mean that you've done a couple of drills and maybe you think you're set and that's good enough. I've done it.
So I'm just back from our Pahrump facility, and I spent some time riding some of the Nevada BDR terrain and Death Valley terrain with our lead instructor, Brian McKenzie, down there. And Brian is just a great rider. He's done a lot of desert racing. He's one of the best riders on our instructor crew. And he had a great pearl of wisdom that I'm going to hold on to and keep for a long time. And that was, whatever element of your riding you're struggling with, and if it's sand, it's not enough to practice it until you feel okay or you feel comfortable. You need to practice it until it starts being fun. And I just really love that pearl of wisdom, because that really is the difference between when you're first starting out, sand looks scary as heck, you try to avoid it. Then you get some skills and you start going through it and you have better confidence and you have better success. That's a better position to be in than you were. But really where you want to be is when you look at sand and go, hey, that looks fun.
Now you start to play around in a little bit more. You sort of test your limits of what you can do and where you can put that front tire.
Yeah. We have a long enough track of sand here that, our students come out in the beginning, they're petrified of sand. They get through it a couple times, they feel okay. They maybe take a little rest. They get back on the bike, and we actually start, once they've gained some confidence just getting through the sand straight, then we start talking about how to steer the bike through the sand with your feet and with the pegs. Well, folks, I hope that some of these tips that we've talked about, some of the mistakes and ways to correct them, will help you in your motorcycle journey as you ride through sand, as you learn to ride through sand. And what I would say is, don't just practice riding in sand until you feel a little better. Practice until it's fun.
I agree. When it's fun, you're comfortable, you're relaxed, you're not wasting energy, and you're probably falling a little less often. So practice until it's fun. And so if you have questions, please leave them in the comments below. Right into the website, let us know how we can help. We have training opportunities here in Bend, Oregon and down in Pahrump, Nevada. It'll be great to see you guys out there. Thanks for watching. Right on.